There are 3 keys on a brass ring sitting on the console next to the microphone right now. I found them about an hour ago in the bottom drawer of a old filing cabinet I was cleaning out. They're heavy, old-fashioned house keys. One is silver, scratched up around the teeth. 2 are dull brass. I've been sitting here in the quiet of the studio, turning this ring over and over in my hands, trying to remember what doors these open. I've lived in a lot of places. I've locked a lot of doors behind me, but for the life of me, looking at these pieces of jagged metal, I have absolutely no memory of what they belong to. They could be the keys to an apartment I lived in 10 years ago. They could be the keys to a friend's house who moved away. Could belong to a padlock on a storage unit that was auctioned off a lifetime ago. The locks are probably gone. The doors might not even exist anymore, but I still have the keys. And as I was holding them, feeling the cold, dead weight of them against my palm, I realized how incredibly strange it is that we do this. We carry the physical and psychological instruments of access for things that have long since vanished from the earth. We hold on to the tools we used to navigate our past, completely terrified to throw them away just in case the ghost of the old world suddenly reappears and demands that we unlock it. I think you're carrying a lot of keys right now. In a world full of noise, trust the signal. If you're hearing this, you have already found it. This is Dove and Serpent Radio. Stay with me. I want to bypass the usual structure tonight. I don't want to neatly outline a premise here. I want to talk to you about the tension in the back of your neck. I want to talk about the fact that you're sitting there right now, listening to this, and your jaw is probably clenched. Your shoulders are probably pulled up slightly toward your ears. You might not even realize it until I say it, but your body is braced. You're braced for impact. You're walking through a perfectly normal Tuesday, going to the grocery store, sitting at your desk, lying in your bed, and your nervous system is behaving as if you're standing in the middle of the battlefield, waiting for the artillery to drop. You are exhausted. But it isn't the kind of exhaustion that comes from physical labor. It isn't the tiredness of a long run or a hard day's work. It's the deep, cellular, bone-grinding fatigue of hypervigilance. You're tired because you're constantly, relentlessly scanning the horizon for a threat. You feel like you can't relax. It feels like if you let your guard down, if you actually just exhale and let the tension drop out of your spine, something terrible is going to slip through the cracks and destroy the fragile architecture of your life. Deep in the forests of northern Ukraine, not far from the exclusion zone of Chernobyl, there's a structure that defies human comprehension. If you were to walk through the dense pine trees and suddenly clear the tree line, you'd find yourself staring up at a cage of rusted steel that is 150 meters tall and 500 meters wide. It's a sheer, towering wall of antennas, cables, and iron grids so massive that it actually curves to match the horizon of the Earth. It's called the Duga radar. During the height of the Cold War, the Soviet Union built this colossal machine in absolute secrecy. It was an over-the-horizon radar system. Its only purpose was to pump tens of millions of watts of electromagnetic energy directly into the ionosphere, bouncing radio waves all the way across the curvature of the globe to the United States. It was listening for the apocalypse. It was designed to detect the exhaust plumes of the intercontinental ballistic missiles the second they launched. For over a decade, this massive structure drew unbelievable amounts of power from the grid, and it created a byproduct. Because it was broadcasting with such staggering, violent force, the signal bled into commercial radio, like all over the world. People tuning in to listen to the news in London, or commercial pilots trying to talk to air traffic control in New York, amateur radio operators in Tokyo, would suddenly hear a sound cutting through their speakers. It sounded like a sharp, relentless tapping, 10 times a second, tap, 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 tap. It was so disruptive and so mysterious that the rest of the world nicknamed it the Russian woodpecker. Millions of people heard it every single day, this constant, irritating, heavy vibration in the background of global communications. But the missiles never came. The threat never materialized. The Cold War ended. The Soviet Union collapsed. The power was cut. And today, the Duga radar just sits there in the freezing wind. It's a dead, rusting ghost. It doesn't listen for anything anymore. The only sound it makes is the eerie, metallic groaning of the iron cooling in the night air. It's a monument to a terror that never arrived. And I think you have a Duga radar inside your chest. At some point in your life, you were placed in an environment that was incredibly dangerous. Maybe it was the house you grew up in. Maybe it was a highly toxic, volatile relationship in your 20s. Maybe it was a brutal, cutthroat environment that demanded you prove your worth every single second of the day just to survive. You were in the blast zone. And because human beings are incredible, resilient, miraculous machines of survival, you did what you had to do. You built an over-the-horizon radar. You learned how to scan the room the second you walked into it. You learned how to read the microscopic shifts in someone's tone of voice to predict if they were going to get angry. You learned how to anticipate the crisis before it happened. You built a massive, power-draining, highly sophisticated emotional antenna to listen for the missiles. And it kept you alive. The radar worked. You survived the environment. But here's the tragedy of the human nervous system. You were brilliant at building the radar, but we have absolutely no idea how to turn it off. The threat is gone. You don't live in that house anymore. You're not in that relationship anymore. You've escaped the blast zone. The war is over. But you're still pumping 10 million watts of energy into the ionosphere. You're still sitting at a quiet dinner with a friend, or lying next to someone who loves you, or just trying to watch a movie on a Sunday afternoon, and your internal radar is sweeping the horizon, desperately looking for the exhaust plumes of a threat. And that's why you're so tired. You're carrying the electrical load of a wartime infrastructure in a time of peace. And that's why the people around you feel so distant lately. They don't understand why you're so guarded. They don't understand why a slightly misplaced word makes you flinch, or why you need to control every detail of a plan, or why you suddenly go quiet and detach from the room. They don't hear the tapping, but you do. You hear the woodpecker. They're generating a constant background static of anxiety that's disrupting your own ability to connect with the present moment. You're listening to the ghost of your own defense mechanisms. Now, I don't know where you're sitting tonight. The studio here is dim. The amber light from the transmitter is the only thing pushing back against the dark. I like it this way. The darkness strips away the visual noise. It forces you to deal with the heavy, unseen things sitting in the room with you. I wonder if this is why reality feels slightly artificial. When you live your life constantly braced for the future, constantly trying to predict the next disaster, you completely vacate the present tense. You're physically, standing in your kitchen, but psychologically, you're living 3 weeks from now, trying to solve a problem that hasn't happened yet. You feel like a ghost in your own life because you're not actually inhabiting it. You're projecting your consciousness forward like a radar beam, leaving your physical body behind like an empty shell. Reality feels thin and fake because you're only giving it 10% of your bandwidth. The other 90% is focused on the horizon. Now, I want to talk about the physical reality of letting go. We use the phrase letting go all the time in modern psychology, like it's a peaceful, gentle act. We picture a leaf falling from a tree, floating softly to the ground. But if you've built your entire identity around survival, letting go doesn't feel like a leaf falling. It feels like dying. In the study of marine biology, there's a process that crustaceans like crabs, lobsters, and spiders, that they have to go through in order to survive. It's called ecdysis, or molting. Because, see, a lobster's shell doesn't grow. It is this rigid, hard, impenetrable armor. It protects them from the crushing pressure of the ocean and the teeth of predators. But as the soft animal inside the shell continues to grow, the armor becomes a prison. It becomes incredibly tight. It begins to suffocate them. If a lobster doesn't shed its shell, it'll die, crushed by the confines of its own protection. So when the pressure becomes unbearable, the creature has to find a dark, hidden place, like under a rock. It stops eating. Okay? It actually has to absorb some of the calcium from its own shell in order to weaken the structure. And it sheds water from its own cells to physically shrink its body. And then the nightmare begins. The shell splits down the back. The lobster must violently contort itself, pulling its entire body, its claws, its legs, its delicate antenna, out through the narrow, jagged crack in the armor. But it doesn't just shed the outer shell. Now, this is the part that biologists marvel at, and it's the part that haunts me. In order to molt, an arthropod must also shed the lining of its own throat. It's got to shed the lining of its stomach. It's got to shed the inner lining of its lungs. It literally has to pull its own skeletal structure out of its own internal organs. It is an agonizing, exhausting, violently vulnerable process, and when it finally pulls free, that new lobster is incredibly soft. It's pale, gelatinous, completely defenseless. If a predator finds it in that moment, it's got no armor to save it. It just has to sit perfectly still in the dark, waiting for the ocean water to interact with its new skin, and waiting for that new shell to harden. If you're feeling a profound, terrifying anxiety right now because the old ways that you used to operate are failing you, because you can no longer maintain the hypervigilance, because your defense mechanisms are suffocating you, you're not having a breakdown. You're entering ecdysis. You're realizing that the armor that kept you alive in the blast zone is now the very thing that is killing you. The Duga radar is crushing you. When you finally decide to turn off the radar, when you finally decide to set the heavy brass keys down and walk away from the doors of your past, it's not going to feel like peace right away. It's going to feel like you're pulling out the lining of your own throat. You're going to feel incredibly soft. You're going to feel exposed. The silence of the present moment without the constant humming of the radar to keep you distracted, it's going to feel deafening. You look at the world and feel completely unequipped to handle it without your armor. But you have to sit in the dark and let it happen. You have to endure the softness. Because if you don't, you'll just stay trapped in the shell. You'll spend the rest of your life as a rigid, unfeeling thing, perfectly protected from pain, but completely incapable of growth. I see so many people walking around like petrified wood. They survived the fire, but they refused to molt. So the minerals slowly replace their living tissue, and now they're set in stone. They're cynical. They're bitter. They pride themselves on seeing the worst in people because it means they're never surprised. They think their paranoia is a superpower, but it isn't. It's just a fossilized radar. You don't want to be a stone. You're listening to this broadcast at this hour of the night because you still want to be alive. You still want to feel the water move. There's a concept in urban planning called desire paths. And when an architect designs a park or a university campus or a public square, they draw beautiful geometric lines on the blueprints. They lay down concrete sidewalks and perfect right angles. They dictate exactly where the human beings are supposed to walk. They say this is the correct route from the library to the street. But human beings and animals are creatures of instinct. We don't like right angles. We like efficiency. We like flow. So within a few months of the park opening, you'll see a subtle change in the landscape. People will start cutting across the grass. Just a few at first, then more follow. The footsteps begin to crush the blades of grass. The soil gets compacted. Eventually, the grass dies away completely, leaving a highly visible, winding organic dirt trail that cuts directly across the architect's perfect, rigid design. Urban planners call these dirt trails desire paths. They are the physical manifestation of human intuition rebelling against artificial structure. They are the earth revealing where the people actually want to go, regardless of where they were told to walk. I think the exhaustion you're feeling right now is the friction between the paved sidewalks of your life and the desire paths of your soul. You spent years forcing yourself to walk on the concrete. You forced yourself to maintain the radar, to carry the keys, to walk the rigid 90-degree angles of what society or your trauma or your anxiety told you was the safe route. You stayed on the pavement because you thought if you stepped on the grass, you'd be attacked. But your soul is pulling you. There is a deep, quiet, persistent instinct inside of you that wants to cut across the grass. The moments when you feel the most disconnected, the moments when you look at your own living room and feel that strange wave of jamais vu, the feeling that none of this belongs to you, that's the desire path trying to show itself. Your deeper self is looking at the concrete layout of your life and saying, we don't actually want to walk here anymore. To take the desire path means you have to trust your feet more than the map. It means you have to accept that the architect who drew the map of your survival years ago didn't know the landscape of who you are today. It is terrifying to step off the concrete. The grass is uneven. There's no clear boundary. But the dirt path is the only one that actually leads to your life. I sit here looking at these keys on the console and 3 pieces of metal. I could put them back in my pocket. I could carry them around for another 10 years. I could let the weight of them remind me of the doors I used to lock, the rooms I used to hide in, the places I used to be afraid of. Or I could just leave them here. I could acknowledge that they served their purpose. They kept the monsters out when the monsters were real. They did their job. But the building is gone. The lock is melted down. I'm going to leave them on the desk. I want you to leave yours too. You don't have to figure it all out tonight. You don't have to dismantle the entire Duga radar before the sun comes up. You don't even have to step completely out of the shell if you're not ready. But I want you to just sit in the quiet of the room that you're in right now. And I want you to notice the hum. Notice the tightness in your chest. Notice the way your mind is desperately trying to scan tomorrow for a disaster. Just look at it. Look at the massive, rusting cage of your own hypervigilance. And then I want you to take one slow, deep breath. And I want you to cut the power to it just for 10 seconds. Tell your nervous system that it's allowed to stand down. Tell the soldier on the watchtower that the war ended a long time ago. Let the tension drop out of your shoulders. Let the jaw unclench. There are no missiles coming tonight. The sky is clear. The stars are burning out there in the freezing dark, and the earth is turning, and the only thing sitting in the room with you is the present moment. It is incredibly soft. It is vulnerable, but it is real. The concrete sidewalk is going to be there tomorrow. The noise of the world is going to start screaming again the second you look at a screen. The people who love their armor are going to demand that you put yours back on. But for now, it's just you and me, and the amber light of the transmitter tubes. We're off the map. We're walking in the grass. So if things have felt strange lately, if you felt tired in a way that sleep cannot touch, maybe the point is not to force yourself to keep carrying the weight. Maybe the point is to notice what part of you is no longer willing to pretend the threat is still there. Keep that signal close. You've been listening to Dove and Serpent Radio. Until next time, stay strange in the silence and keep the dial somewhere between wonder and understanding.